Hey guys and gals, it's your buddies Drew and Ralphie with Living History's Mysteries and Ferocious Feline Productions. You know, for history immortal, men have wondered about the stars. They wanted to walk among the heavens and actually touch the hand of God. Today, we're going to take a look at a little bit of the history of space travel and how we got here. We'll look a little bit into the successes and the sacrifices made by those heroes who attempted to walk among the heavens. But more so, we're going to take a look at the not so human aspect of space travel and the successes and sacrifices there. Check this out. This is good.
You may be surprised to learn that there have been far more animals sent up into space than there have been humans. Most of us know the Soviet Union sent a dog up in the 1950s, but there has actually been hundreds of different species of animals sent up into space, starting as far back as the 1940s and even into the present day. Animal rights organizations have criticized these experiments, but science and world governments are adamant it is essential for humanity's efforts in space exploration. In this video, we will go through the history of animals in space and the purpose of these tests involved. Wait until you hear this. So, sending animals into space originally only served to test the survivability of spaceflight before manned space missions were attempted. But later, animals were flown to investigate various biological processes and the effects microgravity and spaceflight might have on them. To date, 7 national space programs have flown animals into space: the Soviet Union, the United States, France, Argentina, China, Japan, and Iran. Animals have been used in aeronautic exploration since 1783, when the Montgolfier brothers sent a sheep, a duck, and a rooster aloft in a hot air balloon, the duck serving as the experimental control. Back in the day after World War II, the limited supply of captured German V-2 rockets led to the U.S. use of high-altitude balloon launches carrying fruit flies, mice, hamsters, guinea pigs, cats, dogs, frogs, goldfish, and monkeys to heights of up to 144,000 feet. These high-altitude balloon flights from 1947 to 1960 tested radiation exposure, psychological response, life support, and recovery systems. So, starting in the 1940s, the first animals sent into space were fruit flies aboard a U.S.-launched V-2 rocket on 20 February 1947 from White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. The purpose of the experiment was to explore the effects of radiation exposure at high altitudes. The rocket reached 68 miles in 3 minutes and 10 seconds, passed both the U.S. Air Force 50-mile and the International 100-kilometer definition of the boundary of space. The Blossom capsule was ejected and successfully deployed its parachute. The fruit flies were recovered alive. Into the 1950s again, it was the U.S. launched a mouse into space aboard a V-2, but the rocket disintegrated because the parachute system failed. This was followed by the Soviet Union, who launched the R-1-3A-1 flight, carrying the dogs Saigon and Dezik into space, but not into orbit. These 2 dogs were the first living higher organisms successfully recovered from a space flight. Both space dogs survived the flight, although one would die on a subsequent flight. Then everything went quiet for a while until 1957, when on the 3rd of November, the second ever orbiting spacecraft carried the first animal into orbit, the dog Laika, launched aboard the Soviet Sputnik 2 spacecraft. Laika died during the flight, as was intended, because the technology to return from orbit had not yet been developed. At least 10 other dogs were launched into orbit and numerous other on suborbital flights before the historic date of 12 April 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. On 13 December 1958, a Jupiter IRBM AM-13 was launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, with a United States Navy-trained South American squirrel monkey named Gordo on board. The nose cone recovery parachute failed to operate and Gordo was lost. Telemetry data sent back during the flight showed that the monkey survived the 10G of launch, 8 minutes of weightlessness, and 40G of re-entry at 10,000 miles per hour. The nose cone sank 1,302 nautical miles downrange from Cape Canaveral and was not recovered. Monkeys Abel and Baker became the first monkeys to survive spaceflight after the 1959 flight. On 28 May 1959, aboard Jupiter IRBM AM-18 were a 7-pound American-born rhesus monkey, Abel, and an 11-ounce squirrel monkey from Peru, Baker. The monkeys rode in the nose cone of the missile to an altitude of 360 miles and a distance of 1,700 miles down the Atlantic Missile Range from Cape Canaveral, Florida. They withstood forces 38 times the normal pull of gravity and were weightless for about 9 minutes. A top speed of 10,000 miles per hour was reached during their 16-minute flight. The monkeys survived the flight in good condition. Abel died 4 days after the flight from a reaction to anesthesia while undergoing surgery to remove an infected medical electrode. Baker was the center of media attention for the next several months as she was watched closely for any ill effects from her space flight. She was even mated in an attempt to test her reproductive system. Baker lived until November 1984 at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. On July 1959, a launch of a Soviet R-2 rocket, which reached 132 miles, carried 2 space dogs and Marfusa, the first rabbit to go into space. A September 1959 launch, Jupiter AM-23, carried 2 frogs along with 12 mice, but the rocket was destroyed during launch. These were the crazy days of the space race, guys. Can you imagine the tension that was building up? During the early 60s, the Soviet Union launched an incredible amount of animals, including the dogs Belka and Strolka, along with a gray rabbit, 40 mice, 2 rats, and 15 flasks of fruit flies and plants on board the Sputnik 5. It was the first spacecraft to carry animals into orbit and return them alive. Incredibly, one of Strolka's pups, Pushinka, bred and born after her mission, was given as a present to Caroline Kennedy by Nikita Khrushchev in 1961. And many descendants are known to exist. You can be the judge of that one, guys. Believe it or not, back in the days of the Great Space Race, the French were in on the action. France flew their first rat into space on 22nd February 1961. 2 more rats were flown in October 1962, and on 18 October 1963, France launched Fléchette, the cat aboard Veronica AGI, sounding rocket number 47. The launch was directed by the French center CERMA. Fléchette was recovered alive after a 15-minute flight and a descent by parachute. Fléchette had electrodes implanted into her brain, and the recorded neural impulses were transmitted back to Earth. A second cat was sent to space by CERMA on 24 October 1963. There was a delay in recovery of the capsule, and this cat was found dead when finally recovered. The final French animal launches were of 2 monkeys in March 1967. Even China were at it, launching mice and rats in 1964 and 1965, and 2 dogs in 1966. There were dozens more launches by the U.S. and the Soviets during the 60s, 70s, 80s, including on board the Apollo mission, but we'll skip ahead a few decades to the 1990s, where Japan launched its first animals, a species of newt, into space on 18 March 1995 aboard the Space Flyer unit. The last flight of Columbia in 2003 carried silkworms, garden orb spiders, carpenter bees, harvester ants, and Japanese killfish. Incredibly, nematodes from one experiment were found still alive in the debris after the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. In September 2007, during the European Space Agency's Photon M3 mission, tardigrades, also known as water bears, were able to survive 10 days of exposure to open space with only their natural protection. On the same mission, Nadezhda, a common Russian cockroach, was sent into space inside a sealed container and became the first Earth creature to give birth outside the Earth, giving birth to 33 young on board. In March 2009, during the countdown of the STS-119, a free-tailed bat was seen clinging to the fuel tank. NASA observers believed the bat would fly off once the shuttle started to launch, but it did not. Upon analyzing the images, a wildlife expert who provided support to the center said it likely had a broken left wing and some problems with its right shoulder or wrist. The animal most likely perished quickly during Discovery's climb into orbit. On the 31st anniversary of its revolution in 2010, Iran became the latest country to launch animals into space. The animals, a mouse, 2 turtles, and some worms were launched on top of the Kavishgar 3 rocket and returned alive to Earth.
1.5 miles in altitude, 7 miles downrange from Kennedy Space Center.
That was پژوهشگر فضایی جمهوری اسلامی ایران به منظور تعیین مکان صحیح استقرار ماهواره، برداشت اطلاعات از محیط فضایی پرتابگرها،
And we will leave it there for now, guys. Of course, these are but a few notable selections, and there were a dozen more launches. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it a little bit different. Thanks for watching, and remember, the ways by which we arrive at knowledge are hardly less wonderful than the discovery of these things themselves.
Welcome back. You know, it's like I said in the beginning. There have been many successes and many sacrifices in our quest to travel to the heavens. The animals that have been used for the experimentation in the past and are still being used in the experimentation of what's to come can't be forgotten. A lot of us remember the names of those human heroes, the ones who succeeded to walk amongst the heavens and the ones who sacrificed in the name of science. But we can't forget the animals who gave their lives to do the same. What's the future hold for space travel? That remains to be seen. We'll see you out there.